Number 1. The country where $250 a month gets you a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking the Caucasus Mountains. There's a man named David living in Tbilisi right now, in an apartment with hardwood floors, high ceilings, and a view that would cost $4,000 a month in New York. He pays $250. His neighbor downstairs, an elderly woman named Nino, has lived in the same building since 1987, back when the Soviet Union still controlled this stretch of land wedged between the Black Sea and the mountains that separate Europe from Asia. Welcome to Georgia, not the American state, the actual country, a place so old that archaeologists found wine residue in clay pots here dating back 8,000 years, making it very likely the birthplace of wine itself. A place where the capital city sits in a valley carved by a river that's been flowing since before recorded history, and where sulfur springs still bubble up from the ground, exactly where they did when the legendary founder of Tbilisi supposedly discovered them while hunting. If you've never heard of this country, you're not alone. Most people confuse it with the American South, but this is a nation of roughly 3.7 million people, a nation that's quietly become one of the cheapest, safest, and strangest places on Earth to actually live. And today, we're going through 10 things about Georgia that will make you question why you've never considered moving here. Before we get into it, drop your current rent in the comments. I want to see how it compares to what you're about to hear. And if you've ever wanted to live somewhere your money actually stretches, stick around, because number 7 on this list involves a rule that if you break it, Georgians will genuinely never trust you again. Number 2. The rent numbers that sound fake but aren't. Let's talk real numbers, because vague claims about cheap living mean nothing without proof. In Tbilisi, the capital, a 1-bedroom apartment in the city center runs somewhere between $300 and $450 a month. Push slightly outside the center, and you're looking at $200 to $280 for the same size space. A 3-bedroom apartment, the kind that would run you $3,000 in most American cities, goes for around $600 to $800 in Tbilisi's nicer neighborhoods. And it's not just rent. A meal at a mid-range restaurant costs about $6. A cappuccino runs $2. A monthly gym membership is around $25. Public transportation, which includes a surprisingly clean and modern metro system built during the Soviet era and still running efficiently today, costs about 20 cents per ride. Compare that to Batumi, the seaside city on the Black Sea coast, where beachfront apartments with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water go for around $350 a month during the off-season. During peak summer months, when Georgian and Turkish tourists flood the boardwalk, the prices climb. But even at their highest, they rarely approach what a comparable coastal city in Spain or Portugal would charge. And outside the 2 big cities, in smaller towns like Kutaisi or Tel Aviv, rent drops even further. A furnished 1-bedroom in Kutaisi can go for as little as $150 a month, utilities included. Even furniture and home goods, the kind of expenses that quietly drain a moving budget in most countries, come cheap here. A fully furnished apartment, meaning someone else already bought the couch, the bed, the kitchen table, is the norm rather than the exception. In Tbilisi's rental market, since most landlords assume tenants won't want to haggle over shipping furniture into a 4th-floor walk-up with no elevator, that alone saves new arrivals thousands of dollars compared to setting up an apartment from scratch in London or Toronto. Here's where it gets interesting. Georgia has one of the most aggressive tax policies for foreigners in the world. Under something called the individual entrepreneur status, freelancers and remote workers can register a business and pay just 1% tax on income, up to somewhere around $155,000 annually. 1%, not 10, not 20, 1. This single policy has turned Tbilisi into a quiet magnet for software developers, crypto traders, and remote workers from Russia, Ukraine, Western Europe, and increasingly the United States. Entire neighborhoods in Tbilisi have transformed in the last 5 years because of this 1% tax rule. Co-working spaces that didn't exist in 2019 now dot the city, filled with laptops and people speaking 6 different languages. Registering the entrepreneur status itself is surprisingly simple. Foreigners can complete the process in a single visit to the House of Justice, a government service center designed to cut through the kind of bureaucratic red tape that plagues similar processes in neighboring countries. Appointments often take less than an hour, and the paperwork is processed the same day. Compare that to trying to register a small business in most European countries, where the same process can take weeks and involve multiple government offices. But cheap rent and low taxes are just the surface. What's actually happening on the ground in this country is stranger, older, and more layered than any spreadsheet can explain. Number 3. The wine that predates written language. In 2017, archaeologists digging at a site south of Tbilisi called Gadatrili Gora uncovered pottery shards with chemical residue that changed the history books. The residue contained tartaric acid, the fingerprint compound of grape fermentation. The pottery dated back to roughly 6000 BC, 8,000 years ago. That makes Georgia, by most current archaeological evidence, the oldest site of wine production anywhere on Earth. But here's what makes this even stranger. Georgians never stopped using the ancient method. While the rest of the wine world moved to steel tanks and oak barrels centuries ago, rural Georgian families still ferment wine in massive clay vessels called kuvevri, buried underground up to their necks. The grapes, skins, stems, and seeds all go in together. The kuvevri gets sealed with a wooden lid and clay, then buried, and the wine ferments in complete darkness for months. This method is so specific to Georgia that in 2013, UNESCO added the kuvevri wine-making tradition to its list of intangible cultural heritage. Not the wine itself, the method, an entire cultural practice preserved almost unchanged. For 8 millennia, drive an hour outside Tbilisi into the Kakheti region, Georgia's wine heartland, and nearly every family owns a small vineyard. It's not a business for most of them, it's inheritance. Grandfathers pass down their kuvevri to sons, who pass them down again. A family might produce 400 liters of wine a year, almost none of it sold, all of it consumed at home, at weddings, at funerals, at the endless string of feasts that define Georgian social life. The wine itself tastes different from anything most Western drinkers have experienced. Because the skins ferment along with the juice, the resulting amber wines, sometimes called orange wines in trendy restaurants in Brooklyn or London, carry a tannic, almost tea-like structure that white wine drinkers don't expect. Sommeliers in Paris and New York have started paying attention, importing small batches of kuvevri-made wine at prices that would shock the Georgian grandmother who made it in her backyard for practically nothing. Some vineyards in Kakheti now offer tours where visitors can watch the entire process, from grape harvest in September to the sealing of the kuvevri, and even participate in the traditional grape stomping that still happens by foot in wooden vats during harvest season. Tourists pay for the experience. Locals just call it autumn, which brings us to something that will genuinely make you rethink what hospitality means. Number 4. The feast that never actually ends. There's a word in Georgian culture, supra. It technically translates to feast, but that description undersells it completely. A supra is a structured, almost ceremonial dinner that can last 4, 5, 6 hours, presided over by someone called a tamada, a toastmaster whose job is to guide the entire event through a specific sequence of toasts. The first toast is always to peace. The second, always to the ancestors who came before. Then toasts to family, to the host, to the guests, to love, to Georgia itself, to those who have died. sometimes even a toast specifically for enemies, wishing them wisdom rather than harm. Each toast comes with its own wine, poured generously, and refusing to drink when toasted is considered deeply disrespectful. Here's the detail that shocks most foreigners. At a proper supra, you cannot leave the table until the tamada formally closes it. Doesn't matter if you're full, doesn't matter if it's midnight and you have work in the morning. The table stays active, food keeps arriving, wine keeps pouring, until the toastmaster decides the feast is complete. Georgian tables are also famously never empty. The concept of not having enough food for guests is considered a form of shame for the host. So, tables get piled with khachapuri, the cheese-filled bread that's become Georgia's most famous export dish, along with khinkali, the soup-filled dumplings you're supposed to eat by hand, biting a small hole first to drink the broth inside before eating the rest. There are regional variations of khachapuri that Georgians will argue about with surprising intensity. The Ajuran version, shaped like an open boat with a raw egg cracked into the molten cheese center, has become the most Instagrammed version internationally. But ask someone from Imereti, and they'll tell you the round, enclosed version from their region is the real one. Ask someone from Svaneti, and they'll mention their own version made with a local herb blend called kubdari. Every region protects its own recipe like a family secret, because in many cases, it is one. An American who moved to Tbilisi in 2021 described his first supra like this: "I thought dinner was over after the main course. Then they brought out more wine, then more toasts, then somehow more food I didn't know existed. I left 4 hours later than planned, and somehow felt closer to people I'd met that same night than friends I've known for a decade back home." This kind of hospitality isn't performance, it's structural, and it connects directly to something that defines almost every interaction you'll have as a foreigner in this country. Number 5. The rule you break at your own risk. If there's one unwritten law in Georgian culture, it's this: never, under any circumstances, refuse hospitality outright. Not the wine, not the food, not the invitation into someone's home. In most Western cultures, politely declining an offer is normal. "No thanks, I'm good." In Georgia, a flat refusal can be read as a genuine insult, particularly if it comes from a guest inside someone's home. If a Georgian grandmother offers you a third helping of khinkali and you say no with any firmness, you're not just turning down food, you're signaling that her hospitality wasn't good enough, that you don't trust her cooking, or worse, that you don't respect the household. This doesn't mean you have to eat until you're sick or drink until you're drunk. Georgians understand limits, but the expectation is that you engage with the offer, taste something, acknowledge the gesture, rather than shutting it down cold. Locals will often say a soft dayak, meaning yes, take a small portion, and thank the host repeatedly, rather than a hard no. Foreigners who ignore this, who treat Georgian hospitality like an optional inconvenience, tend to find doors quietly closing. Not out of cruelty. Georgians are famously warm people, but the culture runs on reciprocity and respect for the ritual of giving and receiving. Break that ritual enough times, and you become the foreigner nobody bothers inviting back. One expat blogger described learning this lesson the hard way at a work dinner in Batumi. He declined a toast because he had an early flight the next morning. The room went quiet for a moment. His Georgian business partner later explained, gently but firmly, that declining a toast to family was one of the few things that could actually offend people at the table. He never made that mistake again. There's a related concept that trips up newcomers just as often: the idea that a guest in Georgia is considered a gift from God, a phrase that gets repeated so often it's practically a proverb. This means hosts will often refuse payment, refuse to let guests help with dishes, and insist on walking visitors partway home, even at 2 in the morning. Refusing these gestures too aggressively can be its own small offense, a subtle sign that you don't understand the relationship being offered to you. Understanding this single rule will get you further in Georgia than any amount of money ever could. And it's a rule that connects to something even deeper about how Georgians see loyalty, land, and identity. Number 6. The alphabet that belongs to nobody else. Georgian is one of the only languages on Earth with its own completely unique alphabet, unrelated to Latin, Cyrillic, Arabic, or any other major writing system. 33 letters, flowing and rounded, looking almost like calligraphy, even in casual handwriting. Linguists still debate exactly when it was created, with estimates ranging from the 3rd century to the 5th century AD. But what's certain is that it has survived, largely unchanged, for over 1,500 years. This matters more than it might seem. Georgia has been invaded, occupied, or dominated by the Persians, the Ottomans, the Mongols, the Russians, and the Soviets. Empires that tried, in various ways, to erase or absorb Georgian identity. And through all of it, the alphabet survived. Georgians will tell you, with genuine pride, that their script is proof their culture refused to disappear. The language itself belongs to the Kartvelian family, a small group of languages with no confirmed relation to any other language family on Earth. Linguists call it a language isolate at the family level, meaning Georgian and its closely related cousins evolved in relative isolation from the rest of the linguistic world. Learning even basic Georgian as a foreigner is notoriously difficult. The grammar includes a system of verb conjugation that can pack an entire sentence's worth of meaning, subject, object, and even direction into a single word. Linguists studying the language for academic purposes often spend years before feeling confident with its verb structure. Most expats settle for learning enough to greet people, order food, and haggle politely at the market, leaning on the fact that many younger Georgians, especially in Tbilisi, speak conversational English. Walk through Tbilisi's old town, and you'll see this script everywhere. On churches carved into mountainsides, on hand-painted restaurant signs, on political graffiti layered over Soviet-era buildings. It's a living relic that never became a museum piece, still used by children in schools right now, this year, the same way it was used 1,000 years ago. This deep sense of ancient, unbroken identity is also why Georgia's relationship with its neighbor to the north remains one of the most tense in the region. Number 7. The war nobody in the West remembers. In August of 2008, Russian tanks rolled into Georgian territory. The war lasted only 5 days, but it permanently altered the country's map. Russia backed the separatist regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and today, roughly 20% of what Georgia considers its own territory sits under Russian-backed control, separated by a literal fence with barbed wire that Georgians refer to, without irony, as borderization. Drive close enough to these boundary lines in certain regions, and you'll see Russian soldiers standing at checkpoints inside what most of the world still recognizes as Georgian land. Villages have been split in half. Farmers have had their fields cut off by fencing installed overnight. Families have been separated from relatives, living less than a mile away, now on the other side of a border most countries don't even recognize as legitimate. This history explains a lot about modern Georgian politics and public sentiment. Massive pro-European Union protests have rocked Tbilisi in recent years, with tens of thousands filling Rustaveli Avenue, the capital's main boulevard, demanding closer ties with the West and further distance from Russian influence. Georgian flags fly next to European Union flags in these protests, a visual statement of where the country wants to belong. Older Georgians remember an even earlier trauma. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Georgia went through a brutal civil conflict of its own, along with hyperinflation, power outages that could last for days at a time in Tbilisi, and a period so difficult that people still refer to the decade simply as the dark years. Families who lived through it describe burning furniture for heat during winters, when the state-run electricity grid simply stopped functioning. That collective memory of scarcity is part of why the current economic stability, imperfect as it is, feels genuinely precious to a generation that remembers having nothing. Yet, despite the political tension, ethnic Russians who've relocated to Georgia since the war in Ukraine began have found the country remarkably welcoming on a personal level, even while national politics remain complicated. Georgians tend to separate ordinary Russian people from the actions of the Russian government, a distinction that says a lot about a culture that values individual hospitality over collective grudges. This resilience, the ability to survive occupation after occupation while keeping identity intact, shows up again in something even older than the 2008 war. It shows up in the mountains themselves. Number 8. The villages frozen at the edge of the sky. In the far northeast corner of Georgia sits a region called Tusheti, so remote that until recently it was accessible only by a single dirt road carved into the side of a mountain, a road so dangerous that it closes completely for roughly 8 months of the year due to snow and ice. Locals call it one of the most treacherous drives in the world, with hairpin turns hugging cliff edges that drop hundreds of feet with no guardrail in sight. For centuries, the people of Tusheti lived almost entirely isolated from the rest of Georgia during winter months, developing their own dialects, their own architecture, stone defensive towers built to withstand invaders, and their own customs completely separate from life in Tbilisi. Even today, only a few hundred people live in Tusheti year-round, mostly shepherds who move their flocks between the high mountain pastures in summer and lower valleys in winter, a tradition called transhumance that's been practiced in this exact region for well over 1,000 years. Similarly isolated is Svaneti, another mountain region famous for its medieval stone towers, some over 900 years old, originally built as both homes and defensive fortresses during centuries of clan warfare and blood feuds. These towers still stand today, scattered across villages like something out of a fantasy film, and families still live in the houses attached to them. Getting to Svaneti's main town, Mestia, used to require a full day of driving on unpaved mountain roads. Today, a small airport allows a 45-minute flight from Tbilisi. Though flights get cancelled regularly due to unpredictable mountain weather, locals still joke that the old road, the one that takes 9 hours by car, is the more reliable option, even if it means crossing rivers that occasionally flood the path entirely during spring snowmelt. The isolation of these regions created something unusual: dozens of distinct microcultures within one small country. A person from Svaneti and a person from Tbilisi might both call themselves Georgian, but their dialects, their folk songs, even some of their traditional foods differ enough that outsiders sometimes struggle to believe they come from the same nation. This fierce regional identity, layered on top of national pride, explains why Georgians take their folk traditions, particularly their music, with a seriousness that borders on sacred. Number 9. The harmony that predates modern music theory entirely. Georgian polyphonic singing, a style of vocal harmony where multiple independent melodic lines weave together simultaneously, was recognized by UNESCO as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity back in 2001. What makes it remarkable isn't just its age, estimated by some ethnomusicologists to predate the introduction of Christianity to Georgia in the 4th century. It's the structure. Most polyphonic traditions around the world, including early Western classical music, developed gradually from simpler single-line melodies into more complex harmonies over centuries. Georgian polyphony appears to have emerged already complex, already structured around dissonant intervals that Western music theory would later consider wrong for hundreds of years, until 20th century composers started deliberately experimenting with the same kind of tension Georgian villagers had been singing casually for over 1,000 years. Travel to the Svaneti region or parts of western Georgia, and you can still hear this singing performed in its original context, not on a stage, but at a table, during a supra, men spontaneously breaking into three-part harmony between toasts, no rehearsal, no sheet music, simply an oral tradition passed from father to son for generations. Ethnomusicologists from Harvard, Yale, and universities across Europe have traveled specifically to remote Georgian villages, just to record elderly singers before these particular songs disappear along with them. Some melodies exist only in the memory of a handful of people over the age of 70, in villages with populations under 200. Beyond the singing itself, Georgian dance carries a similar intensity. The most famous, called Chev Suruli, depicts a stylized sword fight between two men, blades clashing inches apart at full speed, while a woman moves between them, attempting to make peace. Performed correctly, it looks less like choreography and more like genuine danger and injuries during performances, while rare, aren't unheard of. Dance troupes train for years before being allowed to perform the sword sequences in front of a live audience. This obsession with preserving something ancient, and specifically theirs, runs through nearly everything about how Georgians relate to their own identity, and it circles right back to the most practical reason people are actually moving here in 2025. Number 10. Why this is quietly becoming one of the smartest relocations on Earth. Let's bring this back to the numbers, because everything we've covered, the ancient the mountain villages, the hospitality rules, the resilience against invasion after invasion, exists inside a country that right now offers one of the best cost to quality of living ratios anywhere on the planet. Healthcare in Georgia, while not as advanced as Western Europe in every specialty, is dramatically cheaper. A doctor's visit costs around $15 to $25 without insurance. Dental work, a cleaning and checkup, runs about $20. Many digital nomads and remote workers report paying less out of pocket annually for full healthcare in Georgia than a single copay costs back home. Visa policy is another major draw. Citizens of over 90 countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and most of the European Union, can enter Georgia and stay for up to 1 year without needing a visa at all. 1 year. No paperwork. No sponsor. No proof of income required at the border in most cases. This single policy has made Georgia one of the easiest countries on Earth for a remote worker to simply show up and start living. No bureaucracy required for the first 12 months. Combine that with the 1% tax rate for registered freelancers, rent that's a fraction of Western prices, food that's fresh, cheap, and famously good, and a culture that treats guests like family. The moment you sit down at their table and you start to understand why Tbilisi's population of foreign residents has grown so significantly over the past 5 years. Internet speeds also surprise most newcomers. Tbilisi routinely ranks among the faster capital cities in the region for fiber, broadband, and co-working spaces, built specifically for remote workers, complete with backup generators and redundant internet lines, have opened across the city to meet demand. A dedicated desk in one of these spaces typically runs less than $100 a month, a fraction of what similar co-working memberships cost in Lisbon or Berlin, two cities that market themselves heavily toward the same remote work crowd Georgia is quietly absorbing, without much marketing at all. There's also a growing community aspect that keeps people staying longer than they originally planned. What started as a handful of crypto traders and software developers testing out the 1% tax law has turned into an actual network, with regular meetups, shared apartments, and even informal mentorship between newer arrivals and people who've been in Tbilisi for years. Several people interviewed for pieces on Georgia's expat scene describe arriving for what they thought would be a 3-month trial and staying for 3 years instead, unable to justify leaving somewhere that costs so little and offers so much. Safety is another factor that rarely gets mentioned, but matters enormously in practice. Tbilisi consistently ranks as one of the safer capital cities in Europe and Asia for walking alone at night, with violent crime rates far below most Western capitals of similar size. Parents raising children in Tbilisi often mention letting kids walk to school alone or play in courtyards unsupervised, the kind of freedom that's become rare in many larger Western cities. That sense of safety, combined with the low cost of living, has made Georgia particularly attractive to families, not just single remote workers chasing a tax break. But here's the thing that keeps coming up in interview after interview with people who've actually made the move. It's never just the money. It's the wine that's been made the same way for 8,000 years. It's the alphabet that survived every empire that tried to erase it. It's the mountain villages where shepherds still move with the seasons like their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. It's the toast to peace that opens every meal, and the rule that says you never, ever refuse what's offered to you. Georgia isn't cheap because it has nothing. It's cheap because the rest of the world hasn't caught on yet to what's actually here. If you made it this far, you already know more about this country than 90% of people who've heard the name. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into places the world has quietly overlooked, and drop a comment telling me which country you want covered next. I read every single one.